Hello future doctors, my name is Michael, I'm a first year medical student and in this video I will walk you through how I use AI to study. The obvious use case that most people think about would be using AI to generate practice questions. And that is something that I do, that is something that I've optimized. I've got a system in place for that. The system sort of works on two variables. It works on the context and it works on recursion. But I've spoken about that in a previous video. I've spoken about that in my anatomy video, which is actually applicable to like all the subjects, but especially applicable to anatomy. So I've already spoken about practice questions. In this video, I'm going to talk about two different things. I'm going to talk about how you can get your AI to teach you. So like how it can become your personal teaching companion. And then also a very sort of important thing that not many people implement, but the idea of a memory folder, right? So your AI often forgets things, it'll sometimes miss details, and it'll sometimes make the same mistake twice, and that's incredibly infuriating. And so with a memory folder, you can give your AI a brain, you can give it a memory, and it will remember things, it will not make the same mistake twice. So this is quite powerful. So first thing for today, we're going to talk about sort of creating a personalized learning assistant. What I mean by this is that when you learn a new topic, I've always been a big believer in flashcards, right? I'm a firm believer in flashcards and practice questions. Just go. Just do volume, right? If you do 100,000 questions, if you do 100,000 flashcards over the semester, I can guarantee you minimum 80%. So I'm a firm believer in volume, but what you will notice when you do those questions, or what you will notice before the questions, is that sometimes you don't quite understand a concept. Sometimes you need to explain it to yourself. Maybe like you draw a diagram or you make like a mind map for it, or some people write notes for it. And what I propose is to take that to the next level, right? Is to take that, to feed it into AI, and then get AI to correct you, get AI to ask questions. I'll give like an example of how I use this, right? I like to explain something in my own words. I like to build upon first principles, and then that sort of gives me a concrete foundation on which to build upon for the rest of the subject, but then it also means that I understand the nitty-gritty, right? Like it's a good way to reassure myself. And so what I'll do is I'll go to AI and I'll say, for instance, I'm learning about the kinetics of smooth muscle, right? So sort of I want to describe smooth muscle to you and then just check if there's anything wrong with my description. And then you give your description, right? Like you build upon first principles. What's cool is you don't even have to type, right? You can switch on the voice mode and then you can just talk to AI, which is even better. So you switch on the voice mode, you talk to AI. You say, in smooth muscle, right, to initiate a contraction, you've got calcium that comes in, and then that phosphorylates myosin light chain kinase, and then troponin moves tropomyosin away, and then myosin binding site is exposed, and then actin can bind onto it, and then you've got cross-bridge cycle, right? So you explain in your own words from first principles what you think is going on. You send it off to AI. AI gives it a read, and it'll usually answer, yes, that's a great explanation, you really nailed it, but, and then it'll tell you where you are wrong, right? And, that's really cool because then you spot the flaws in your mistakes and you identify those flaws and you build upon them. And it's very different to like manifest it and to say it in your own words. There's something that just clicks, and that it helps a lot. If you're into like the theory of studying, right? There's a whole science behind it. I think this technique is particularly powerful when paired up with AI because it works a number of principles and a number of mechanisms that are usually like employed separately, right? So you've got the Feynman technique, and you've got Socratic questioning, and you've got active recall, and you've got metacognition, and you've got all of these buzzwords, all of these techniques that are usually used separately, that are lumped together to make this very effective. Now, the second thing I'd like to touch upon is, as I mentioned previously, the working folder. So you tell Claude, you can literally prompt this, right? You tell him, set up a file on my desktop. It's a memory file, right? So every time there's some feedback or there's some improvement or I make some request for the practice tests, that you feel you need to remember in a future scenario, write it down in the memory file. And then make a note to yourself before you generate any question, read through the memory file. Grok had this problem where a lot of the times he would generate a question and it would be a great question, but the answer was always A. So it would be like A, B, C. You know, there were like so many A's in there that it's not fun. And so I told him, note it down in your memory file, right? Because sort of when I told him verbally in the chat to remember to make the answer A, he forgot because he's forgetful. But he wrote it down in his memory file, and sort of now he remembers to mix up the answers for it not to always be the same letter. There was a similar thing in Claude where he always liked to give me short questions and short answers. But, you know, sometimes you want something long. Sometimes you want something that like really tests all of the details. And so that's another thing that he wrote down in his memory folder to vary the length. And so these are all takeaways that you can implement and that you can use in the future. You can use this to create a recursive loop. I do believe that if you can master the generation of questions, right, and you do that by optimizing context and recursion, as I spoke about previously, if you can master that, and then you can master sort of explaining as if to a 5-year-old to an AI and then getting AI to teach you, right? So this having like a personal AI tutor, and then you can master a memory and a file, right? A brain. Give your AI a brain. It doesn't help you teach it all of these things and it forgets tomorrow. But if you can master sort of all three of these things, then I think your study journey will be incredibly benefited. And I think this is the 20% of the effort that will give you 80% of the results. It's really quite powerful. And I hope you found it as useful as I did.